Could Moldova be about to fall back under Russia's influence? On the 28th of September 2025, the country goes to the polls in parliamentary elections that could shape its geopolitical future. One side wants to press ahead with European Union membership, while others look back to Moscow. At the same time, fears are mounting that Russia is actively working to steer the country back into its orbit. So, why is Moldova so divided, and how is Russia trying to shape this forthcoming election? Hello and welcome. My name is James Kerr-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict and security. Although the Soviet Union collapsed more than 3 decades ago, many of its former republics remain split between those seeking a European future and those still tied to Russia. For some, the choice at the end of the Cold War was more than clear. Integration with the European Union and NATO promised democracy, prosperity and a chance to escape Moscow's dominance. But for others, the situation was far more complicated. While some of the population and political leaders may have favoured building Euro-Atlantic ties, historical, cultural and economic links to Russia continued, reinforced through language, media and often a dependence on energy. In such cases, the divisions that emerged have shaped politics ever since. One of the best examples is Moldova. For decades, it's balanced between Russia and the West. But while in recent years it seemed to have leaned decisively towards Europe as the country prepares to vote for a new parliament, deep divisions have once again come to the fore. With several pro-Russian parties vying for power and allegations of Russian interference, Moldova now finds itself at a critical juncture. The Republic of Moldova lies in Eastern Europe, sandwiched between Ukraine to its east and Romania to its west. With a population of around 2.6 million, the country is ethnically diverse. While the majority of Moldovans speak Romanian and many identify closely with neighbouring Romania, which Moldova shares deep cultural and historical ties, there are also significant other minorities. These include Ukrainians, Russians, Bulgarians and Turks. Crucially, with an annual per capita GDP of $7,600, it's one of the poorest states in Europe. As a result, many Moldovans have emigrated, creating a significant diaspora community. On top of this, Moldova is also home to 2 regions with special significance for this story. Gagauzia, a Turkic Orthodox Christian autonomous region with strong Russian ties, and Transnistria, a breakaway territory controlled by Moscow-backed separatists and which still hosts Russian troops. Moldova's story begins in the Middle Ages when the principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia emerged before becoming vassals of the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century. In 1812, the Ottomans handed over the eastern part of Moldavia, an area known as Bessarabia, to the Russian Empire. While the remainder of Moldavia later united with Wallachia to form modern Romania, Bessarabia stayed under Russian control until 1918, when, amidst the turmoil of the Russian Revolution, it also joined Romania. The problem was that the newly created Soviet Union never accepted this decision. In 1940, at the start of the Second World War, the Soviet Union seized the region, creating the Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic, a top-level republic of the USSR. Over the next 50 years, Moscow consolidated its control. Although Romania also fell under communist rule and became a close Soviet ally, the Kremlin discouraged any sense of shared Romanian identity. Instead, a distinct Moldovan identity was constructed. As well as insisting that Moldovan and Romanian were entirely separate languages, the Cyrillic script was also reintroduced. At the same time, settlers were brought in from Russia and neighbouring Ukraine to change the population. All this would last until the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 and Moldova declared independence. But despite this, Russia quickly acted to preserve its influence. In 1992, separatists in Transnistria, backed by Russian forces, broke away. Creating a frozen conflict that endures to this day, This has limited Moldova's room to manoeuvre as it needs Moscow's support for an eventual solution. Meanwhile, Russia steadily built up its control over Gagauzia, whose autonomy was recognised by the Moldovan government in the mid-1990s. But even beyond these regions, Moscow retained a powerful influence. Older generations and Russian-speaking communities remained loyal to Russia. At the same time, Russian television remained popular, while the promise of cheap gas and jobs in Russia also strengthened the Kremlin's hold over the country. Meanwhile, with little prospect of joining the European Union, the 2000s saw pro-Russian parties dominate the country's politics. But even when pro-European coalitions did emerge, they were often plagued by allegations of corruption and fragile alliances, further cementing Russia's powerful presence in the country. In the end, the decisive moment of change appeared to come in February 2022, when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of neighbouring Ukraine. This transformed Moldova's political landscape. Suddenly, the dangers of being dependent on Moscow became very clear. As energy supplies were cut, disinformation spiked, and cyber attacks rose. Indeed, there were even fears that if Ukraine fell, Russian forces would march in to seize Moldova. In response, the country accelerated its shift towards Europe. Just weeks after the invasion, the pro-European Party of Action and Solidarity, PAS, aligned with the country's president, Maia Sandu, applied for EU membership. Keen to cement the links, by June 2022, Moldova had been granted EU candidate status. But while the government has pushed ahead with reforms to meet EU standards, including by tackling the country's deep-seated problems with corruption and strengthening institutions, many are unconvinced. Aside from the linguistic and cultural ties to Russia, large parts of the population remain sceptical about the EU path, arguing that it's done little to lift poverty or improve the economic situation. Meanwhile, faced with a growing loss of influence, Russia has pushed back strongly. Launching what many see as a hybrid war against Moldova, there are growing claims that Moscow has sought to destabilise the country politically, economically and socially in an effort to derail its European path. And all this has seen President Sandu frame the choice starkly. Moldova must choose between Europe and Russia. And it's against this backdrop that Moldovans now head to the polls. I hope you're finding this useful. If so, please do give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing if you haven't already. Thanks so much. And now back to the video. The elections always promised to be deeply polarised. While the ruling PAS is campaigning on its reform record and European orientation, its primary challenger is the newly created Patriotic Electoral Bloc, the BEP. Led by former President Igor Dodon, it's openly pro-Russian in its outlook. As things stand, the two parties appear to be running neck and neck, with around a third of the vote each, with polls showing a very slight lead for the BEP. Meanwhile, other smaller players also play an essential part in the process. These include the nominally pro-European Alternative Bloc and the populist R Party, which leans towards Moscow. If PAS loses its majority, as many now believe, these smaller parties could hold the balance of power. Meanwhile, concerns over direct Russian interference in the elections have steadily grown, as well as claims that Moscow has been paying Moldovans to post anti-government content online. Diaspora communities have also been targeted with offers of trips to Moldova to vote and other inducements to vote for pro-Russian parties. And as officials warn of possible cyber attacks against election infrastructure, there are also growing fears that efforts to undermine public trust in the electoral process may result in popular protests if the vote goes in favour of the ruling PAS. To add to all this, the picture has also been confused by the decision to exclude the strongly pro-Russian parties linked to the fugitive oligarch Ilan Shor, who was convicted of massive fraud and accused of channeling Russian money into politics. Likewise, Gagauzia's pro-Kremlin governor was also jailed for diverting Russian funds to a banned political party. While no longer direct players in politics, the narratives and networks of both these groups remain active. But while the outcome will have profound implications for Moldova, the effects will also be felt far beyond the country. If the PAS wins a strong mandate, the government can press ahead with reforms and EU integration. For the EU, therefore, Moldova's accession process is not just about enlargement, it's also about demonstrating that the European project can extend stability eastwards despite Russia's efforts to prevent it. At the same time, this would mark a significant defeat for Moscow. In addition to closing off another route for influence westwards and bolstering the EU's presence in Eastern Europe, it would also signal to other vulnerable democracies that Russian interference can be resisted. Conversely, if pro-Russian forces gain ground, even without a majority, they could stall or block reforms, therefore undermining Moldova's EU bid. And it's for all these reasons that on the 28th of September, Moldovans won't just be voting for a parliament, they'll also be choosing their country's geopolitical orientation. I hope you found this useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.